I live in Sydney, Australia. This terrifying experience happened when I was just 15 years old, completely alone at home. The clock had just struck 9 in the evening when I stepped out of the bathroom. Suddenly, I heard the sharp clang of our front gate swinging wide open, followed immediately by my dog's fierce barking echoing through the house. My heart stopped as I watched a dark figure sprint past our porch window and disappear into the backyard. Even in the dim light, I could see enough to make my skin crawl. This person was hunched forward, like an animal, with ghostly pale skin that seemed to glow in the darkness. He wore all black clothing and had long, greasy black hair hanging over his face, like a curtain. I rushed to the living room window, my dog still growling menacingly at the front door. Since I hadn't seen this strange man leave, I knew with growing dread that he was still lurking somewhere in our backyard. I stood frozen by the door, waiting and watching. When footsteps approached the porch, a second man appeared, looking much more normal than the first. He walked straight up to our security bars with casual confidence. Our conversation still haunts me. He asked if I'd seen his friend around. I nervously told him yes, that I thought the guy was hiding in my backyard. His response chilled me to the bone. He said he'd been chasing this random guy all over town because the man was clearly on dangerous drugs, but something didn't add up. Why would he call this person his friend one moment, then a random guy the next? Before I could process this contradiction, he vanished into the darkness toward our backyard. I should mention that we have a back door, but it's also protected by security bars and was firmly locked. I waited nervously at the front door, then tried to calm myself by sitting down. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 2 minutes, the normal-looking guy returned to our porch. This time he had the pale, drug-addled man with him. The creepy guy was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, clearly agitated and unstable. I approached the door cautiously to hear what they wanted. The normal guy's request made my blood run cold. He apologized and explained that his friend was extremely nervous and would feel much better if I unlocked the door and stepped outside. He claimed this would prove to the disturbed man that I was harmless. A sharp pain shot through my chest as pure terror gripped me. The pale man had stopped his frantic pacing and now stood perfectly still, staring directly into my eyes with an intensity that felt inhuman. The silence stretched on, thick with menace and unspoken threats. I didn't say a word. Instead, I stepped forward and began pushing our French door shut. That's when the normal guy's mask finally slipped. He lunged forward with shocking speed, shoving his hand desperately through the security bars, trying to grab me. I leaped backward and slammed the door shut with my foot, immediately sliding the bolt into place. My hands shook as I called my parents, who immediately contacted the police. By the time officers arrived, both men had vanished without a trace. The police revealed something that made my stomach drop. There had been a violent break-in just down our street, less than an hour earlier. They never caught those 2 men. Looking back now, I realized the first guy probably ran to our backyard, searching for a way inside while the second man helped him. That explains why they spent so much time back there plotting their next move. What still disturbs me most is that they weren't interested in a simple break-in. The fact that I was home didn't scare them away. Instead, they desperately wanted me to come outside to them, or they wanted to get inside where I was trapped. It was a Thursday night when my mom was pulling a late shift at the hospital. Both my brothers were away at college, leaving me completely alone in our house. Earlier that evening, I'd had a couple friends over to watch the baseball game and share a few beers. They left through the back door around. I headed upstairs to the kitchen to store the leftover beers in the fridge and prepare for bed. After getting ready, I climbed into bed and lay there struggling to fall asleep. Then I heard soft footsteps climbing the stairs just outside my room. Relief washed over me as I realized my mom had come home early I heard her familiar cough as she passed my bedroom door and entered the bathroom. Then she went back downstairs to the kitchen, where she began making an enormous amount of noise with cabinets, dishes and cookware. I was far too lazy and tired to get out of my warm bed and go downstairs to ask her to keep it down. Instead, I grabbed my phone and sent her a quick text, asking her to please stop making so much noise because I was trying to sleep. I placed my phone back on the desk and rolled onto my side, trying to get comfortable. Suddenly, I heard rapid footsteps racing back upstairs. My bedroom door swung open and my mom stepped inside. The hallway light was off, so I couldn't see her face clearly in the darkness. When I looked up, I could only make out her silhouette standing by the doorway. She seemed to be slouching in an odd way that didn't look quite right. I told her in an annoyed tone to stop making so much noise downstairs. When she didn't respond or move, I sat up in bed and said more forcefully. Just then my phone vibrated on the desk, indicating I'd received a text message. Since it was pretty late for anyone to be texting, I naturally reached over to check who it was. The message was from my mom. My heart nearly stopped as I read her words. "I'm still at work." I dropped my phone onto my bed as I slowly looked up at the doorway. The person standing there wasn't my mother. Even though panic was flooding through every part of my body, I had to think quickly and carefully. I said, "Mom, I need to get some sleep. Please get out." I said this because I wanted to play dumb and act like I had no idea that someone had broken into our house. The figure at my doorway remained completely motionless. I picked up my phone with trembling hands and sent my mom a frantic text. "There's someone in the house. I mistook them for you. Call the police right now." My mom replied back, "Okay." Within seconds, something then shattered the terrifying silence in my room. A woman's voice, crackling and rough like sandpaper, began speaking. It sounded like she was repeating "don't know where to go" over and over again. Her voice grew louder and more desperate as I realized with horror that she was moving closer to my bed. I screamed, "Get back," as I fumbled desperately for the lamp switch next to my bed. When the light finally clicked on, I found myself face to face with some elderly woman with wild, wiry white hair. Her wrinkled hands were stretched out toward me as she approached my bed, still repeating those same haunting words, "Don't know where to go." I screamed, "Get away from me." As it became clear she was about to attack, I jumped off my bed and raced out of the room, then threw all my weight against the door to keep it shut. Seconds later, I felt her pushing against the other side, trying desperately to force the door open. She began screaming, "I need to get out," while pounding relentlessly on the door. I held that position for what felt like forever, using every ounce of strength I had. She was absolutely relentless in her attempts to break through. My mom kept calling my phone repeatedly, but I couldn't risk letting go of the door to answer. It wasn't until I heard police officers knocking loudly on our front door that I finally released my grip and ran to them. The old woman immediately came rushing after me, but as I threw open the door and yelled at the cops to stop her, they quickly pinned her against the wall. Within moments, she was in handcuffs and being placed in the police car. I told the officers everything that had happened. Based on her bizarre behavior and my account, they said she would need to be properly identified and evaluated to determine if she was suffering from mental illness. To no one's surprise, it turned out she was. I discovered later that night, after the police had left, that when my friends departed through the back door earlier, I had completely forgotten to lock it behind them. That's exactly how she managed to simply walk into our house uninvited. The experience has definitely left lasting mental scars. Even now, anytime I hear the slightest sound in my room while trying to sleep, I have to look up and scan the darkness to make absolutely sure nobody is standing there watching me. Before moving off on my own to California, I lived practically in the middle of nowhere on my dad's sprawling ranch in Colorado. It was a beautiful and massive property, but I never truly loved living in such an isolated rural setting. I found it incredibly boring and lonely. Plus, as that old cartoon Courage the Cowardly Dog always said, creepy and disturbing things happen in the middle of nowhere. There had been numerous occasions when strangers trespassed on our property,
which is exactly why my dad owned 3 different firearms for protection. I remember one particularly scary time when he had to chase 2 dangerous men off our land while carrying his rifle. What I'm about to share happened several years ago. I believe it was in the middle of June. I was completely alone at home since my parents were away on vacation together, and my little brother was spending the night out with friends or at his girlfriend's house. It was an unusually hot night for Colorado, so I had opened every window in the house to let in the cool evening air. I used to stay awake pretty late during that period of my life, so I think it was around 1 in the morning when I was still in the living room watching television. That's when I noticed our motion-sensing patio light suddenly turn on outside. This particular light would only activate when it detected very obvious movement from a person, so I immediately assumed it was my little brother finally returning home. To be safe, I got up and looked carefully out the window, but I didn't see anyone there. I pulled out my cell phone and tried calling my brother quickly. When he didn't pick up, I went to sit back down on the couch. That's when it started. Someone began knocking persistently at our front door. Our door had a peephole installed because obviously anyone coming to visit our house had to go significantly out of their way to reach us. We always needed to know who was there before opening the door to strangers. When I went to peek through the peephole, I couldn't see anyone standing there. My first thought was that it was probably just a ding-dong ditch prank, possibly some local troublesome kids, or maybe my brother playing games with me. I was really hoping it was the latter option. I shut all the blinds immediately, because I was becoming increasingly paranoid that someone was watching me from outside. I quickly shot my brother a text message saying that if I found out it was him messing around, I wasn't going to let him back inside the house. Moments later, there was an incredibly loud knock right behind my head that made me actually jump off the couch in terror. Someone was knocking forcefully at the living room window, followed by what I can only describe as 2 distinct voices speaking in perfect unison. One was a deep, threatening male voice, and the other was a higher-pitched female voice. Together they said, "We see you," simultaneously. My heart was racing out of control as I tried to imagine the most hopeful explanation possible. Maybe it was my little brother and his girlfriend playing an elaborate prank on me. In that terrifying moment it almost made sense, or maybe I just desperately wanted it to make sense. But the aggressive banging on the window didn't stop there. It continued relentlessly but moved to a different window. This time the large window in our dining room where I hadn't thought to shut the blinds yet. From the angle where I was standing, I could clearly see 2 dark figures pressed against the window, but there was absolutely no way I could make out anything about their faces in the darkness. I didn't dare look at them directly as I ran upstairs to my dad's bedroom. I knew exactly where he kept one of his guns hidden under his bed because he had shown me the location for emergencies just like this. With shaking hands, I loaded the rifle and ran back downstairs to the dining room window, but they had completely vanished. With a loaded weapon in my hands, I felt much more confident about opening that front door and going outside to confront whatever was happening. When I stepped onto the porch, I decided to do one quick but thorough lap around the entire house and check on our cattle while I was out there. I wasn't any kind of expert marksman, but I had strong protective instincts for our property, and I was absolutely prepared to use the gun if the situation demanded. The whole property appeared clear and our cattle were calm and undisturbed, so I went back inside, carefully checked every door and window, and finally went to bed upstairs. For about half an hour there was blessed peace and quiet. Then I heard the most disturbing sound coming from downstairs, and outside, someone was frantically pounding on our front door with incredible force, accompanied by a man shouting at the absolute top of his lungs. He wasn't shouting actual words or sentences, just pure terrifying screaming. I grabbed the rifle from beside my bed and ran to the living room window. I pushed it open and fired several rounds outside into the dark night, as a warning. The screaming and violent pounding stopped immediately, and I heard 2 sets of footsteps quickly stomping off our wooden porch. Then there was nothing but the peaceful sound of crickets chirping in the night. The rest of that night passed without incident. Actually, nothing like that ever happened again until I finally moved out of that isolated ranch. But I confirmed the next day that it definitely wasn't my brother and his girlfriend playing pranks. My dad was incredibly proud of me when he heard how I had protected our property and family. I'm just grateful that my dad owned those firearms, and that experience made me agree with his decision to keep them even more strongly. I was home alone one night during the spring season when I was on a FaceTime call with my friend. At one point I was pacing back and forth in my bedroom when I happened to pass by the window and glance outside. That's when I saw someone standing motionless on the street, directly facing our house. and staring up at my window. I looked more carefully and realized with growing unease that he was looking straight up at my exact window. I immediately told my friend Jordan about it on our FaceTime call and tried to angle my phone so she could see him too. She said she couldn't make him out clearly but urged me to call my parents right away. So I hung up with Jordan and continued watching the man for a few more tense seconds before walking away from the window. I sat on my bed and called my mom, accidentally waking her up since it was around midnight. I quickly explained the situation and she told me to simply turn off all my lights and close the blinds. She assured me that would make him go away. I followed her advice exactly, but after a few minutes of burning curiosity, I couldn't resist getting up to lift the blinds slightly and peek outside again. My stomach dropped when I saw that the man had moved much closer. He was now standing on the sidewalk right in front of our house, still staring directly up at my window. This time I called the police immediately. The operator asked if the man appeared to be holding any weapons. I told her not that I could see. She instructed me to ignore him completely, and if he didn't leave within 10 minutes or if he stepped onto our property, I should call them again. She also mentioned that a patrol car would drive past our house to hopefully scare him away. I hung up and crawled into my bed, then called my friend Jordan back. We talked on FaceTime while I stayed hidden in my bed for about 5 minutes. She convinced me it was time to check the window again. When I looked this time, the man had completely disappeared. I stood by the window with the blinds now raised, waiting anxiously for the police car to drive by. Jordan stayed on FaceTime with me for support. After about 5 to 10 minutes of waiting, I finally saw a police patrol car slowly cruise down our. It stopped briefly right in front of our house, and I watched the officer use the spotlight on the side of the car to sweep across our property and several neighboring yards. The patrol car drove away soon after, and I felt confident that meant the man was definitely gone and not hiding on our property. After finishing my FaceTime call with Jordan and saying goodnight, I tried to settle down for sleep. I had been lying in my bed for about 20 minutes when I heard a strange creaking or cracking sound coming from somewhere outside. I got out of bed and looked carefully out the window, but I couldn't see anyone there. Feeling slightly relieved, I went back to bed and tried to fall asleep again. A few more minutes passed before there was another cracking sound from outside, this time much louder and more distinct. I looked over toward the window from my bed and felt my entire body freeze in absolute shock and terror. There was a dark figure pressed right against my window. I have an upstairs bedroom on the 2nd floor, and suddenly those mysterious cracking noises made perfect, horrifying sense. This person had been slowly climbing up the side of our house. I ran to another window and screamed help over and over as loudly as I could, desperately hoping that our neighbors would hear my cries. I also immediately got on the phone with emergency services again and told them to send another police car to our address right away. The man at my window tried to squeeze his body through the small opening in the window frame, but he seemed to give up when he noticed one of our elderly neighbors outside yelling something threatening at him. The next time I dared to look at the window, he had vanished completely. According to my elderly neighbor who had bravely come to my aid, the man jumped down from the 2nd story and ran away down the street as fast as he could. Police officers arrived once again, and this time I spoke with them directly and provided all the detailed information they needed for their report. They assured me they would be patrolling our immediate neighborhood throughout the entire night, and then went on their way. I didn't get a single minute of sleep that night, but I'm convinced that terrifying man was scared away for good and never returned to bother us again.